Hello, this is Matthew Allen, and I'm going to talk about the connections between academic reading and writing in this video. So for this writing class, our goal is to develop our writing skills, but the the way we do that involves a lot of reading. So I think there's a strong connection between reading and writing. Um, so there's a general connection, which is just that we need to develop our language, our vocabulary, our grammar, our syntactic knowledge, just our general language knowledge. We need to develop that to quite a high level through a lot of reading before we can write. Reading is receptive knowledge. We receive words and ideas through reading, and writing is productive knowledge. So our receptive vocabulary and our receptive language knowledge is always larger or higher than our productive knowledge. That's just naturally um, how language develops. It seems to be impossible or very unlikely that you would be able to speak or write words that you don't know through reading that you didn't recognize. So there's just a general language development function. But in terms of more advanced writing, and academic writing is relatively advanced writing, there's a second point that I want to emphasize, and that's the purpose of this class, which is building knowledge of structures and functions. So structures are units of language, organized units of language, or rule-based units of language. So things like phrases and sentences and paragraphs. And functions are strategies or ways of using this language. So for a basic example, a sentence. A sentence is a structure of language, but we can use a sentence to do a lot of different things. We can use a sentence to introduce an idea, to provide a definition, or to make an argument. So let's stop for a second and consider the purpose of academic writing. There are some practical purposes like passing a class or getting a job. We need to write a resume and get a job or publish an article so that we can make a name for ourselves in the field. But the more general, more foundational, more important purpose is to communicate knowledge to readers. So this is a communicative model where authors have ideas that they develop through their reading and their thinking and their research, and then they share those or communicate those ideas, that knowledge, that information to readers. Um, Readers and writers can happen at different places at different levels for academic writing. So with students, when they write, their purpose is often to show their professors that they understand or that they're thinking about class content in a way that's acceptable or that meets certain standards. And so their reading would be intended to help them develop their understanding and develop their thinking. For researchers and scholars, when they write, their purpose is often to share or produce new knowledge or ideas, and they often write for either other researchers or professors or scholars, as well as for students. So they might need to explain things. Sometimes professors write for the general public or they write for technical uses, but we're going to focus on this class on these core areas of communicating knowledge within an academic community. So we can also ask ourselves what makes writing effective or not effective. And so we'll go back to this communicative model. Writing is more effective when it communicates better. And so another way to put that is to say writing that communicates knowledge to readers is effective when readers can understand it better or with less effort. So we can call this reader-friendly or reader-centered writing instead of, for example, writer-centered writing. So a writer-centered piece of writing would be somebody who just puts all their ideas on the paper and says, okay, figure this out. Whereas a reader-centered or reader-friendly piece of writing, the author would take time, go through multiple drafts, and they would ask themselves, is this writing clear? And that's this other point that I want to talk about, is clarity or being clear versus being correct. So these are two standards to judge. Students often want to know if their writing is correct, and this is based on a culture of going to class, taking tests, and trying to find the right answer. And that's not so helpful with writing. Um, there is a language feature we need to consider, which is language has rules, it has grammar, syntax. And so, yes, we do need to um, develop our language proficiency so that we follow a lot of these rules. But what I want to emphasize is the goal is not to be correct, it is to be clear. So, small mistakes are acceptable. Small mistakes in grammar are acceptable, I think, if the larger ideas are interesting because they're about knowledge and they're communicated clearly. All right, so just a little bit more on this idea of taking a reader's perspective. I like this book by Elizabeth Rankin. She emphasizes the work that writers have to do for readers. And one of the points that she gets into is the idea that um, we have to consider other people. Um, so as I mentioned, good academic writing promotes understanding in others, but we have to be sensitive to our assumption that other people think differently than we do. So this is quite hard for most people to really appreciate. Um, when we do academic writing, we often spend quite a lot of time thinking about a topic, reading about a topic, trying to understand it, so that after days and weeks and sometimes months and years, as we prepare to write, we develop our understanding quite a bit. And so then it seems natural to us. It's kind of a fish in water problem. A fish in water doesn't know it's wet. It just feels natural. But when somebody else jumps in the water, they notice the wetness or the temperature of the water right away. It feels unnatural. So that's how it is when we spend a lot of time swimming around in our ideas. So we just need to be as sensitive to the fact that other people do not understand things the same way that we do. And that raises this idea of understanding is work. Again, we're talking about communicating ideas. And so we have to think about the understanding. So there's this idea of a ratio of work. Who should do more work, the reader or the writer? And so I think again the idea of a reader friendly approach says, well, the writers should work really hard to make their ideas accessible to readers, so that when readers go through it, it seems so clear they don't even know they're working. It just feels like knowledge. They're learning. They don't really feel like they have to do a lot of work to access the ideas. That's a goal. That's pretty advanced, but I think that's what we should all be aiming for or working toward as much as possible to express our ideas in ways that the readers can access without too much work on their side. So that brings us back around to this idea of one of the basic ways to get better at writing is to get better at reading. So this is a quote from Elizabeth Rankin. She says, to be active, observant readers of published writing in our fields. The goal is to become more sensitive to those features of writing that attract and engage us as readers, as well as to those that confuse and annoy us. So we should learn from texts and treat them as mentors or experienced people that we can follow. So she says features of writing. I'm going to talk about structures and functions. Um, but we're going to try to identify things that are effective because they promote understanding. When we read, we can say, oh, this structure or this function helps me understand. I should do that more when I write. Or this function or this structure confuses me. I don't like it. I don't want to do that as a writer. I do not want to do that to my reader. Okay, so let's conclude here with some concrete illustrations of these ideas of structures and functions. So on this side, we have structures, and these are units of language or units of text in writing. So these can range moving from smaller to larger, words and phrases. So phrases are groups of words. Clauses are groups of words that have a subject and a verb. Sentences are complete ideas, grammatically complete ideas. They have a subject and a verb, and they end with some kind of punctuation. Paragraphs are a collection of sentences, and then sections are collections of paragraphs. And we put those together, we have text. And those can be papers or articles, chapters, and even longer into books. On the other side, we have functions. So functions are very practical in the sense that it's the moves or strategies that writers do um, with their units of language. So we have all these words and phrases. Um, how we use them, now we're talking about functions. So for example, providing definitions, making arguments, making claims, giving illustrations or examples, summarizing or paraphrasing, uh, and concluding our ideas, or maybe making transitions between ideas. So these things work together. Structures and functions work together. Okay, so that leads us to our discussion prompt. I've posted this on our course website. If you're in the class right now, I encourage you to go to the course Brightspace page and work on this. But otherwise, this is something to really think about. This is taking Elizabeth Rankin's idea of identifying features in writing when you're reading. So the questions here ask you to consider what makes academic writing easier or better or more satisfying, what makes academic writing harder or more frustrating for you. Um, so we're at the beginning of the class, you might have trouble naming some of these features. I think by the end of the class, the goal is for you to not have so much trouble naming some of these features. So you'll feel more comfortable saying, oh, when writers provide transitions or when they explain their organizational structure. That helps me understand. Okay, so I'll finish there. Um, but the goal here is to really emphasize that reading and writing are so closely related that we almost don't want to separate them.